So I'll kind of go back and forward based on the previous question and then this question.
Yeah.
It all depends on what our definition of telco and NFVs are. So you were kind of leading to that in terms of whether it's layer 2 or up to layer 7. So, I mean, containers are definitely a solution to a developer's problem, but you have to remember telcos, so telcos are trying to do two things overall: reduce OpEx and increase and CapEx in the same process through various means. But that just solves half the problem in my mind. You have to increase revenue streams, or else you don't have happy shareholders.
Yep.
That's just the reality of it. So, so from an optimization point of view, from a CapEx and OpEx, you can definitely use cloud as a mechanism to try to squeeze more efficiencies out of your network. I'm trying very hard not to use the buzzwords, that's one component to it. But then you got to look at what telcos. So telcos realize this. They're moving up what I call the value stack. At the end of the day, people are only willing to pay for what they consume. They were willing to pay consumption for network and internet access many years ago. Now it's implicit. So you see telcos buying large or making large M&As of massive satellite companies, and what are those companies doing, right? They're announcing over-the-top streaming services. Those are the type of environments that I see where developers actually are gravitating very heavily to containers. You know, gaming companies, right? There's a public gaming company. They love containers, and they use it. To your point, the networking wasn't necessarily mature for Docker for them, but they picked a networking solution that was, and they use it to currently deploy in real time new and evolving profile environments for their customers. So from a telco point of view, I think there's two aspects to it. NFVs, and by the way, I kind of get irked to the point where, because again, I kind of mentioned it earlier, if customers are just wrapping a VM or a function today around the VM and claim success, oh, and by the way, in order to get it to the performance near as half as what we had it before, we have to NUMA bound it, CPU pin it, and give me all the damn vCPUs on the server. It can't be used for anything else, and it's pretty much, give me SRIOV, then you're like, well, that's just a darn appliance. So what are you doing, right? So to me, those workloads by definition should not be virtualized, because the cost efficiencies should actually start moving. The cost efficiencies for that, you see all the cloud guys doing it. Amazon, Microsoft going to FPGAs. They're actually moving stuff to more customized silicon for certain types of workloads, right? Yeah. That said, it is a good bridging mechanism to see what network functions that go across the whole stack, right up to layer 7. Mobility is probably very prime for this, because mobility actually uses a lot of control and state that do use x86, and that's a perfect example of what can easily be virtualized and containerized over time. But where it makes sense, right? I'm not one for doing whatever's the latest buzzword out there. And then, of course, the other point I wanted to make is beyond NFVs, there are over-the-top plays that telcos are making just through out of sheer necessity. Well, so that's where I see containers becoming more and more.
I know Ali wanted to, you wanted to say something. But before you do that, so you mentioned FPGAs. And what's interesting is at Microsoft Ignite this week, they actually announced that they're using FPGAs throughout Microsoft. But in the Azure group, they're using FPGAs for networking. That's the primary use case for networking, so that they can actually, yeah. And so I thought it interesting that you brought that up, because they're using the custom silicon to solve a networking problem. Ali, you were going to?
20 years ago in routers, by the way.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. FPGAs are reconfigurable, though, right? I mean, that's the key there.
Yes.
It's not that it's once deployed and you can't change it.
There's different variations.
That
right?
you can, yeah, that's what they said, right?
Very specialized will get you awesome performance, but very limited in functionality.
And it's still innovation in software.
It is.
Yes.
It is still innovation in software.
Exactly.
But
that's what's key. That you're able to change what you're doing today rapidly to something else.
But it's funny how it's the hardware story again, right?
Yeah,
everything
absolutely.
to software, and then now it's going back to hardware again.
Perhaps, I mean, the better discussion was FPGAs and VMs and not VMs and containers.
So, I mean, I was just going to say, really, at the end of the day, I think we've all touched on this. It's the fact that it's not mature yet. Containers are not mature yet. I mean, even if you look at VMs, you don't just take OpenStack by itself and deploy it in a telco. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be added. Things like to address the performance, some of the manageability, the security, SRIOV, OVS, DPDK, integration with ODL or some other SDN controller. So all of that stuff had to be done in a VM environment, even real-time KVM. So we've done that work, I think, as a community, a lot of it. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done for VM environment, and we're just starting to do that for container. And I think in time, we will get that work done. But that doesn't mean that everything is going to switch to containers and, you know, we're going to stop doing VMs. I think it's going to be both worlds.
So you're saying it's not a zero-sum game, which
That's-
is...
that's
Brian,
correct.
I'm interested in your take on this, Mr. Sullivan. On the whole, like, containers and AT&T for doing NFV or VNF.
Well, as I said before, it's not the solution. It's a step toward more efficient resource use where it fits. But it's fit in terms of the existing network functions that we, for example, use for mobility, right? Or for like what we're doing in Cord inside, you know, the Open Cord project is limited. That fit is limited currently.
Okey-dokey.
Make a comment, which I think it's picking up on what Marco was saying, which was we've seen VNF vendors claim success because they've virtualized their VNF, they've stuck it in a VM, and the VNF itself is not even multi-threaded, right? So it makes no difference whether it's in a VM or a container. The performance is still going to be challenging, and so and very often they'll present you with a VM that's this big. This is our VNF, and it's a big fat pile of something. You don't quite know what it is and how it's been engineered, and if it's even going to be able to take advantage of a lot of the good work that Ali was talking about that's going on in the community. And so we can do all the work we like in terms of container or VNF performance, VM performance with OpenStack, but unless the VNF vendors and Brian mentioned this, I think, you know, re-architecting their applications to be more cloud native and to be able to take advantage of a lot of those optimizations, it's still a losing battle, I think.
Okay, so my final question, which is a little bit more thought-provoking, is so we know we've heard that you know the chorus has been OpenStack has been very supportive. It's been great as a project because it supports all this open networking and there's a lot of community feedback. And so the question is around the current trend of supporting telco and NFV workloads. Has that been more of a result of fallout among enterprises, or did OpenStack just happened to come by and everybody went, "Ooh, I've got this problem and I'm going to take it to OpenStack," and OpenStack happened to build a framework to support it?
I'll take a swing at that. I think that telcos are in a particularly difficult place because they actually have huge scale. They have huge requirements, complex requirements. I really like the point about 100 years of legacy equipment. But they also don't have the profit margins that some of these enterprise companies have. So they have, their costs are going up and their cash is going down. And so, I think you made the point. They really don't have many other choices. I think enterprises have lots of choices. They decide, all right, do I want to make infrastructure a core competency, or do I just want to outsource it to the cloud, right? And that's a choice that, if you're an enterprise, you can make. If you're a telco, you can't outsource your entire company to the cloud. That's not possible.
Mm-hmm. I'll summarize what he said. That's the process of commoditization. So that's
Words that would not come out of my mouth, but
I mean, that's the reality, not only for telcos, but also for traditional vendors at telcos as well. So I give AT&T all the credit in the world because they are leading the pack. They are reinventing themselves because they see what needs to be done. And they're working up and down the stack to do everything from reskilling the company, from doing everything they can to not only bring in the new revenue streams required to keep the business going and the shareholders happy and the dividends nice and plump. It also ensures, a more agile and kind of streamlined network to address what I feel is going to be an explosion of state and connections in the network, especially with IoT coming down. It's not a buzzword. I mean, the reality is that's going to put so much strain on most of the telco networks. I think that's what's freaking the hell out of them right now. There's a really interesting road ahead, and I applaud AT&T and some other European carriers for at least taking the step forward to make this transition because they see it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll also applaud AT&T. I think they've done a great job pushing the
Brian smiling.
I know with the Brian fan club here. So they've done a great job in terms of pushing the commoditization, but it's not the same with all telcos. So we get, and I'm sure this is the same for other OpenStack distributions too, get involved with telcos that want to move to virtualized network services. they see the benefits of a commodity platform. They want common off-the-shelf hardware and a commodity open source platform, but then they will lean on the vendors to implement that in a way that's very, very specific to that telco. And thereby blowing out a lot of the cost benefits of being on a commodity platform and common off-the-shelf hardware. And so there's a learning. The great thing AT&T has done has been very active in the community and shaping it upstream to ensure that whilst they are specifying what they want, that's being delivered to everybody. And that's part of the balancing game that we see with a lot of those telcos is if you want commodities, great, but use it as commodity. Don't use it as your special thing. You know.
So I think, most people in this room probably know that timing has also been to the benefit, I think, of OpenStack, in my opinion. If you look back with this whole NFV initiative that got started in 2012, if that had happened, earlier, before, OpenStack was ready, maybe it's a different story. I think when the telcos decided to virtualize their network, it was later. It was later than the enterprise, because we all know the enterprise started it first, right? Enterprise did the virtualization, and I think the telcos, tend to be more. They want to see the proof before they proceed. So they saw that it was proven. The enterprise proved that virtualization brought benefits to businesses. And when the telcos decided to do it, I think OpenStack at that time was just, one of the open source products that was there. So I think that sort of paid off a bit. But even outside of telco, we're seeing a lot of the enterprises that are really starting to, follow the success of OpenStack. With Red Hat, we say we have roughly about 1,000, OpenStack, customers. Of course, in terms of numbers, there are few of them that are telcos out of that 1,000, although they have the largest systems, so they bring in, the higher volume in terms of revenue. But even the enterprise are starting to see the real value. And I think right now the enterprise is sort of waiting to see OpenStack be proven so that they can also jump on it. So I believe it's just a matter of time before you see more and more enterprises, beyond just the bigger ones who are doing it now, start to follow OpenStack.
So Brian, we will now hear from AT&T.
So yeah, the interesting thing about this question is that, okay, yeah, it was there, it was available, and we had a need, so we jumped on it, right? And everybody has seen that, and they've jumped on it too, right? I think that's great. So basically, it was the right time and the right tool, and that's one of the reasons why it's taken off the way it has in the telco NFV use case space. But actually, what we're seeing in the OP NFV is that people are recognizing that the things that we want to bring to this platform, right? The reliability, the scalability, the elasticity, all these things will definitely support the enterprise users as well. They have a lot of the same objectives, right? So NFV is not just a telco thing in the end, right? It will strengthen the applicability of this platform for a whole range of advanced virtualization functions, right? So the enterprise people have maybe had the lead, and they focused and they've been working really hard in their space. And in the meantime, the telcos have come in and taken a bit of the the spotlight. But we're working together, right? And so the OPNV, and especially, right, is a broad organization focused on many use cases and markets as well. We had some early discussions, for example, with the Open Networking User Group, the ONUG, right? And we share a lot of the same motivations that they do for using OpenStack, for example.
Okay. Are there any questions? We're down to our last 7 minutes. Any questions from the audience?
So when we say telco, right, is it, I'm just trying to understand the use case and the spread. I think Mark was getting close to that in terms of, so when we say telcos, is it necessarily, we mean mobility, or there's wireline?
So for the streaming audiences, the question was, is telco from a mobility perspective, what sort of use case?
Yeah.
What's the killer application of
So
this?
So if you look at, for example, we work fairly closely with Verizon. They've been fortunately been very public about that. There is no killer app. There is a long tail of services that they want to provide. They actually see this as an infrastructure, again, to become not just a cost savings, but actually new sources of revenue. And once they start getting a huge rollout of some new service, that maybe end up being the killer app. But right now, there's just a long tail of things they want to move to this. For everything from IMS services to video transcoding, like just kind of dumb applications, but actually take up a lot of compute and resource and save a bunch of issues for them in their network.
So I'd just pick up on that. I guess the question is, the question was what's the killer app, but also kind of what's a telco, right? And there was a lot of, I think, unnecessary complexity early on when people were talking about NFV in terms of function virtualization and virtualized network functions, and us in the OpenStack community that were trying to get up to speed on this, thinking that these were very particular types of environments. But really, a VNF is just an application, and a VNF can be a firewall or a VPN or a router or whatever. So they're different types of application. And yes, they have certain characteristics in terms of performance and throughput and redundancy and those things, but enterprises generally want those things too, which is what Brian was saying. So I kind of agree. I don't think there are certainly some big complex VNFs and IMSs and EPCs and all those kind of things, but the reality is they're just complex applications that need to be managed, modeled, and implemented in OpenStack or OPNFV. And if we can do that, then everybody benefits.
Just very briefly, there's a whole range of services. I mean, telcos are anymore, except for the fairly small ones, are media companies, right? They have an entire range of services, for example. So our number one data item is video. It is now, it will be forever, right? And shipping that through the network efficiently, having a CDN strategy that works and is virtualized is one of the key things. So it's definitely not telephone calls anymore. It's services of all types.
Very quick answer is the killer app will be prioritized based on revenue, based on the scale needs coming in the future. And then the tail end of applications will naturally use the cloud that's built, because that's the best way of leveraging a unified platform to essentially remove every other disparate cloud that you have. To me, that's essentially what telcos are going to gravitate to, and that's actually more an organizational problem than anything else. It's not a technology problem. And one other thing I'll add is telcos, while they're going through the process of not only trying to optimize costs of existing growth they see in their network and CapEx spend, and obviously trying to grow revenue on top of that, they should really think about how, this is where it starts getting controversial, and actually I think this is probably one of the more useful features of a telco cloud, is opening it up for anyone to use. You will never be able to compete with the likes of Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, et cetera, Oracle. That's not your forte. Your forte is you have a cloud that's now going to be very and highly distributed, close to eyeballs. There's a very inherent properties to that, and I'll speak to it later in my presentation, but that's actually very valuable for a lot of different use cases and applications, ranging from from virtual reality, right, low latency type connectivity requirements, right down to regulations forcing drones to have last mile, access and coordination of where it was for whatever reason, right? Cloud-based black boxes, if you want to call it. So there's interesting properties of a telco cloud that I think telcos will be able to make revenue over time, beyond their own workloads.
So we have 3 minutes. I want to take one more question. Is that okay, Abby?
That's fine.
All right. Anyone else have any questions? Does anyone else have any questions? If not, then I'll have Ali answer.
So what's the so you pointing towards the monetization aspect. What's the impact on the MVNO? Now, does it mean anybody can become an MVNO as a reseller for mobility-centric context?
So maybe let me comment on the last question and tie it to this MVNO. So I think generally we use the term telco, sort of to mean not just the, telephony companies, like the AT&Ts and the Verizons, Obviously, we include both wireless and wireline, but we also include cable. For example, you just heard Comcast, mention that they're a big user of OpenStack. So we probably should be using the term communication service providers more than telco. It's easier to say telco than communication service providers. So that's what it is. But the two sort of, not killer app, but categories that we see, at least a lot of our customers, is one is this Evolve Packet Core, which is essentially a fancy word of saying, it's the LTE network, virtualizing the LTE network. And then the second is customer premise equipment, things like what Comcast talked about with their X1, video, box. So with MVNOs, generally MVNOs don't have their network infrastructure, right? They would have, maybe they would have some of their own signaling functions, but they don't really, control functions, but they wouldn't have, their own actual bearer channels. So they may have their own functions virtualized, but just acting as a bridge to a telco network. So we haven't seen a lot of those on the MVNO front. So I don't know if there's some specific ones there that someone else can comment on.
Short answer, I would say, is MVNO is an enabler for services that I think over time is going to be run on top of an MVNO. Wireless guys call it 5G slicing. We call it L3 VPNs and have for 20 years. It's just separation, multi-tenancy, a lot of different words for it. But the reality is, if like Google with Project Fi, when Apple wants to become an MVNO, they should be able to go like this and do it, right? And the fact that I'm paying them $40 a month for the iPhone user upgrade program, and one day they ask me for $20 extra a month to become an Apple user, I honestly don't care what infrastructure it's running on. I just want a better experience. So that's where you can actually tap into new revenue streams. But I'm saying go up the stack. If you look at line of business type IoT applications, an IoT workflow very specific to a certain fleet type tracking or nanny tracking service, you want to put sensors on your kids. You name it. The idea is you want to be able, a company wants to be able to start up a brand that's IoT based and literally create an MVNO within minutes. And that infrastructure should be honestly set up very flexible and agile for these new companies. It's a platform, right? Just like the internet was a platform, to me, IoT and MVNO is a huge building block to that, is the platform. You just need an agile infrastructure to do it, right? Which is what cloud is all about in the telco space.
Anyone else?
They would benefit out of it.
Of course, because again, it's all about value, and value is tied to customer experience, right? So.
The killer app is the infrastructure.
Take the mic, because we're recording.
Yeah. So the killer app then is the infrastructure itself. You can build anything on it. It's just a new type of infrastructure for telcos. Perhaps not spinning up VMs on Amazon, but spinning up a whole new generation of services on telco clouds.
I always say it would be an interesting day when Amazon has to spin up workloads on a telco cloud.
Yeah.
Because they want to have drones flying all over the place, and there's an FAA mandate for certain reasons why they just have to do it.
Right. Google was in the news, right? They're increasing their regions. But telcos are already everywhere, right? They have close proximity to the end customer, and it can.
Telco infrastructure, I call it beachfront property. Trust me, all the cloud guys want it so bad because it's 100 years of build out of infrastructure. That's so capital intensive. They'd be insane to try to do it.
Right.
Well, the very fact that Google have pulled back on fiber, they have more money than God, and they're pulling back on it because of that level of investment required. It's telling. So yeah, the telcos just need to figure out exactly where those apps are going to be, so they can take advantage of that last mile.
And actually, if I can just be a little bit preachy on that subject, all the telcos I've talked to have tried to get the perfect equipment for NFV, which is going to be different from the perfect equipment for the storage-based application, which is going to be perfect for this other equipment. Just put the equipment out there. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
Right. Build it out there, license it. Having millisecond level access to your end customers. That is phenomenal.
Great. Well, thank you very much to our esteemed panelists, and thank you so much for watching our session.